In July of 2016, at the Republican National Convention, there was one major theme: Make America Great Again.
Let's put our hands up.
If you can, think back to 2016. Before Trump was ever president, many people were poking fun at the RNC that year. Even mainstream Republicans. Hell, former President George Bush didn't even show up, which was unprecedented.
We're gonna make America great, make America great again. We're gonna make...
Lock her up, that's right. Yeah, that's right, lock her up.
If you want someone to fight for you and your country, I can assure you, he's the guy.
But I'll say this, Donald Trump will always tell you the truth as he sees it. And that's why we can trust him to make America great again as our next president. Thank you. God bless you.
Sure, this all may have seemed a little ridiculous, but the convention did have the glitz and glam you'd expect when anointing a reality TV star to the throne of the Republican Party.
Nobody knows the system better than me. Which is why I alone can fix it.
Amidst this MAGA energy, some may have overlooked one of the loudest people fighting for Trump.
What's up, GOP? Good evening, everyone. My name is Dana White. I am the president of the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
Trump's 2016 campaign was a joke to many, not to Dana White. The UFC president was one of the first public figures to join the MAGA movement. He became Trump's professional promoter, his hype man. Why? This is episode 2 of In the Red Corner, a 3-part audio series about the UFC, Donald Trump, and the violent politics that unite them. I'm investigative reporter Karim Zidan, and like you heard in the last episode, I'm laying out why I believe the relationship between Trump and the UFC is concerning. Why we should pay attention to the growing connection between this American strongman and the strong men he aligns with. In the first episode of In the Red Corner, we went back to the league's inception and explained how Trump helped the UFC in its early years. In this episode, we're talking about Trump's first term in office, how UFC President Dana White threw his weight behind Trump well before others took him seriously, how UFC champions followed in Dana's footsteps to ingratiate Trump amongst fans and fellow fighters, and how $1 billion sale of the UFC only emboldened the organization's MAGA turn even further. Back in May of 2016, the RNC represented a clear fissure in the Republican Party. Dana White's speech was just one example.
Thank you. I'm sure most of you are wondering, what are you doing here? I am not a politician. I am a fight promoter. But I was
Republicans were now talking less about Reaganomics and foreign policy, and more about culture war issues and prosecuting political enemies, and, well, loaded and sometimes conspiratorial speak about draining the swamp. Dana fits somewhere in the middle.
Donald was the first guy that recognized the potential that we saw in the UFC and encouraged us to build our business.
Dana's speech was only 4 minutes long, but it was fierce. He boasted about Trump's loyalty and his work ethic and his business savvy. And Dana rehashed the story we heard last episode of how Trump supported the UFC during its early years.
Donald championed the UFC before it was popular, before it grew into a successful business, and I will always be grateful, so grateful to him for standing with us in those early days. So tonight, I stand with Donald Trump.
Dana's a professional promoter. He knows how to tell a story and how to sell a fight.
Let me tell you something. I've been in the fight business my whole life. I know fighters. Ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump is a fighter, and I know he will fight for this country. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
By the time Dana took the stage at the 2016 RNC, the UFC was no longer a small countercultural upstart. It had Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor. It was a time when the sport was beginning to go mainstream, when people who didn't really care about MMA before started to tune in. And when Trump won the election, just months later in November 2016, it came as a shock to many. Not to journalist Sam Egan, who we heard from in our first episode. He also wasn't shocked by the Dana White endorsement.
I think that endorsement went a lot further than I thought. Trump being the Republican nominee, openly loving a sport that was perceived as trashy by mainstream media outlets, perceived as being, you often hear people like Gavin McInnes say things like, like conservative is the new punk.
Gavin McInnes is the founder of the far-right group, the Proud Boys.
And it's like, I don't think conservative is the new punk, but I think that the MAGA was sort of the new punk. And it was like, he was into a thing that people didn't get, that navigated sort of mainstream circles and sort of mainstream news and mainstream media. It's something that people didn't understand.
Whether or not Dana's speech actually moved the needle, he'd thrown his lot in with the right candidate, and his support for Trump only increased. The heads of many professional sports leagues, like Adam Silver of the NBA and Roger Goodell of the NFL, act like traditional corporate CEOs and keep their personal politics close to their chests, because they don't want to alienate potential fans, also known as revenue. Not Dana. He was loud and proud about his support for Trump, and he took it a step further. He threw the weight of his entire organization behind the president. When the UFC celebrated its 25th year anniversary in 2018, Dana released a series of documentaries, including one about the organization's history, with Trump. It's called Combatant-in-Chief, and it's a 14-minute case study in how the UFC was turning into a platform for the president.
Well, there is a fighter's mentality, whether you're in the UFC or whether or not you're president. People like Dana White have that, and they have it in spades.
I stand with Donald Trump.
He saw this thing coming, and I think he felt the way that we felt about it, that this could work and this could be big.
This was just part of the trailer. The full documentary was taken down in the wake of the January 6th insurrection. But it was a wild turning point in the relationship between Trump and the UFC. In the documentary, fight promoters and former politicians and UFC officials praised the president and his business savvy. The documentary cemented Trump's place in UFC history when a New Jersey athletic board commissioner claimed, on camera, that Trump set the pace for the UFC's eventual success. Now, the consequence of Dana leaning into Trumpism was that it empowered UFC fighters, world champion fighters, to take a stand too. Olympic gold medalist and UFC champ Henry Cejudo spoke at a Latinos for Trump event alongside the president's son, Eric Trump.
As an immigrant son, my parents came to this country, obviously like anybody else, man, to live the American dream.
And then there was Tito Ortiz, a former UFC champion turned conspiracy theorist who campaigned for Trump before eventually winning a seat in California's government using a MAGA platform.
For America, been a fighter for our constitutional rights, and that's why I back our president 100%.
And UFC superstar Jorge Masvidal headlined a Fighters Against Socialism bus tour with Donald Trump Jr. by his side. Here's part of his speech at the prestigious American Top Team gym in South Florida.
I'm going to let you in on something. The Democrats just think that they're entitled to the Latino vote. They think that we just have to hand it over to them. That's right. We sure as hell don't. Así mismo. Así mismo. We're not going to buy the same wolf tickets and false promises that destroyed great countries like Venezuela and Cuba. It's not going to happen. You know what else is not going to work for them? Playing Despacito on your cell phone to pander to us. Hell no.
Now, I want to be very clear. Different voting preferences are okay. And these three fighters, all of whom are Latino, represented what happened in the election. That the Latino vote swung towards Trump, even if the majority still voted blue. Masvidal, who we just heard from, is the son of Cuban immigrants. His rhetoric matched those whose family history is paved through communist countries, where even the slight scent of the word socialism drives them the other way. And, sure, Dana may have opened the door for UFC fighters to feel empowered to take a stand, but there was already a cultural shift afoot. The rise of quote-unquote woke politics happened in the wake of Trump's election. To many progressives, Trump represented America's sins of racism and sexism and toxic masculinity. And so the reactionary right pushed back. Like on the world's most popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, which, by the way, is hosted by a longtime UFC commentator.
You and I, who used to be on the left, are now like, where's the left? Where are you guys? You guys are so far away. I can't even see you.
Or in the much darker content of Andrew Tate, a kickboxer turned influencer turned accused sex trafficker.
So I think my sister is her husband's property, yes. When a bride is walking down the aisle.
During the Trump years, a slew of new media personalities gave voice to those aggrieved by progressive values. Their content reaches hundreds of millions of people around the world. Fighters were a big part of this, and they had even more cultural sway than Dana White. So, like many other professional athletes, they put their fingers on the political scale. But in contrast to other professional athletes during those years, who spoke out in favor of, for example, social justice, with UFC fighters, that scale happened to be MAGA. Because there's an unspoken consensus, one that Cejudo, Ortiz, and Masvidal reflect, that UFC fighters are mostly conservative, that MMA itself is a right-wing sport. Here's MMA analyst Luke Thomas.
So I don't exactly know how to explain this. I can only tell you that I've discovered this in the course of my life, and there's just been a few times where it's just like, okay, this can't be a coincidence, right? So things that we associate with being hyper-masculine, guns, fist fighting, military, the gym, they just naturally attract right-wing people. Like, these are right-wing spaces. And that doesn't mean that they're all of them that way, but just seeing this pattern enough to know that, like, you're just not going to have a lot of Kamala Harris supporters who are black belts in jiu-jitsu. You're going to get some, for sure, but not many. You're going to get much more the other way. And so I think we have to kind of reconcile with what are people of this political persuasion? Why are they so interested in these kinds of things? And that's a different answer for someone else to give, but my experience over 45 years has been the same through the 90s, aughts, 2010s, and now 2020s. It's all the same.
Luke's experience in these types of spaces isn't just from reporting. He was in a gun club, and enlisted in the US military, and joined weightlifting gyms, and, of course, is ever present in the world of combat sports. Sam Egan, though, has a theory as to why the two tie together, and he also speaks from experience as a former Division I wrestler.
I mean, this is honestly a guiding question in my life and like my identity, because I have to, for my own sake, firmly believe that like nothing about combat sports is inherently right-wing. I really don't want to believe that. That being said, if you wanted to draw a comparison between the sort of traditional establishment conservative ethos, it's really easy to watch MMA and to see someone who has risen from the ranks in the UFC via his own merit, pulling himself up by his bootstraps, training really hard in an individual sport, arriving at the pinnacle of the UFC. There's a really easy parallel in that imagery between combat sports and the traditional individual responsibility conservative ethos.
Luke thinks that, during the Trump years, the growing culture wars helped bring MMA's right-wing political sentiment to the surface.
The predominantly left-wing media, which, you know, I don't say that pejoratively, but just sort of descriptively, if you were protesting some kind of injustice as part of an NBA player, you would get a lot of positive coverage for this. The opposite was not necessarily true. What you just started to see were like cracks in that armor a little bit, where there was like espousal of this candidacy or those views. And Dana White was actually one of the very first ones to kind of do that.
And for Sam, part of Trump's allure is based on traditional conservative views on gender and masculinity, sentiments that fighters embody too.
The political base that he's built demands that he be verbally violent and appear strong. Stand among men who are very, very, very capable of violence, who are very strong, who are often very handsome. I think that that's something that you can't like understate, and like the importance of like the appeal of like the traditional conservative man. Yeah, I mean, I think he wants to be like a wolf among wolves.
Now there is one more fighter I want to talk about.
I should have knocked him out. Brazil, you're a dog. All you filthy animals suck. I got one thing to say. Tyrone Woodley, I'm coming for you. If you don't answer the front door,
For those who haven't heard that voice before, the guy calling Brazil a dump and Brazilians filthy animals after finishing a fight against a Brazilian in Brazil, brace yourselves. Because Colby Covington is a character. He's a villain amongst UFC superstars, and he's worked his way to multiple title shots, not just because of his grueling fight style and insane gas tank, but because he began opening his mouth.
You look like a bottle of Pepto-Bismol. And it makes sense, because you got diarrhea at the mouth, son!
Dustin, you're a fucking coward. Your wife's a hoe, and she has fake tits on her chest, and you're a piece of shit father.
I just took care of Miami street trash. Now it's time to take care of Louisiana swamp trash. Where you at, Dustin Poirier, you You said it's on site! Name the site, Dustin! Bring that away!
Covington's entertaining, that's for sure. He's also the UFC fighter who reflects MAGA most explicitly. Whether it's authentic or an act, it works. He puts on a costume, like a wig and feathers to look like the founding fathers, or he'll just throw on a simple red MAGA hat, and then Covington will dig into Trump talking points and culture war issues with the same intensity he brings to the cage.
I got the most famous person in the entire planet coming to watch this fight Saturday night. Donald Trump fucking saved America. He put America first. Let's go, Team America.
Fuck yeah, America, motherfuckers.
Fuck yeah, God bless.
Here we go, motherfuckers! Let's go! Raise up the American Revolution!
There are tons of these kinds of clips, because Covington knows how to run his mouth and to rile up his opponents. This was explicit in Covington's fight against former champion Tyrone Woodley. Covington, white, rural, Trump-loving, and Woodley, black, from Ferguson, Missouri, the home of Michael Brown and many racial justice protest movements. It was MAGA versus BLM.
Tyron, appreciate your time today. Originally, we all thought that you and Colby were going to be up there together, and this was going to be a joint press conference. We find out it's not. Let me ask you, are you disappointed that you don't get the chance to face him down, to deal with him, or are you kind of happy you don't have to put up with his stuff today?
I'm just excited that Black Lives Matter.
Are you surprised that in the lead
At the pre-fight press conference, Woodley repeated the same answer to every question. Black Lives Matter.
Shocking to you at all that he hasn't gone into more like he normally does?
I'm just really excited that Black Lives Matter.
Fair enough. And
it didn't help him. MAGA won. Covington drowned Woodley and eventually broke his rib in the fifth and final round. Here's Covington in the post-fight press conference.
We're always going to be divided. He stands for everything I hate. He stands for evil. He stands for Black Lives Matter. I stand for America. I stand for dedicating this victory to all the law enforcement out there, all the military, all the people that put their lives on the line every day to protect our freedoms and to keep our communities safe. So, he doesn't stand up for that stuff. He hates that. He wants to defund the police, and he hates America. And that's why he got broke tonight.
Understood.
No matter if it makes you look away or lean in, this stuff sells fights. It's part of the business the UFC is in. Turning an athletic event into a battle of ideologies, it's the spectacle beyond the cage, getting people invested in wanting to see Covington get beat up, only for him, win or lose, to put on a MAGA hat again that gets people to take their hard-earned money and pay for events. And Trump? He may not have bought the pay-per-view, but he did tune in. Here's Covington in an interview after the Woodley fight.
So this is the best I've ever looked, and the POTUS is calling me. Mr. President!
You gonna put that on speaker for us, or what?
Mr. President!
We're gonna try and get Donald on speakerphone. Let's see.
You are a great fighter, man. I'll tell you. You make it so easy. I don't know how to do that.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. You gave me the dragon energy when you shook my hand on Sunday at your rally, and it doesn't matter if King Kong was in front of me. I was not going to lose after getting to shake your hand and beat your rally.
You weren't going to lose. Well, he's a strong-looking guy.
Thank you so much,
I'm proud
Mr.
of you. I
President.
just made a big speech. I had 35,000 people. I said, I got to get home now to watch Kobe.
According to Sam Egan, these publicity stunts do a lot to boost Trump's allure.
If you're a 22-year-old man who's often sort of pseudo-apolitical, and you're watching a UFC event on screen, you watch a tall, fit, handsome man step into the ring and exert his will and beat someone up and demonstrate their very literal strength, and then get on a mic and be like, also, Donald Trump is a strong man and he will fight for you.
So now go win the next one and just keep it for a long time, right? Just keep that championship for a long time. But you are something.
Now, as you can tell from the phone call, Trump is a big fan of Covington. In 2018, Trump hosted Covington and Dana at the White House. They posed for pics in the Oval Office, Kobe wore a blue sports jacket and red MAGA hat, and had his arm around the president. Trump? He had Covington's UFC belt slung over his shoulder. It was just a normal athlete visit to the White House, like champion NFL and NBA teams do. Except it wasn't. At the time, other champion teams like the Golden State Warriors and the Philadelphia Eagles broke with precedent and didn't visit Trump in the White House. These were the years of Colin Kaepernick, a star football player who kneeled during the national anthem to protest police brutality.
Are blatantly racist, and those issues need to be addressed.
And so Covington did the opposite. He was the reactionary right-wing we talked about earlier, personified. He made the culture war come alive. But let's pause here for a second. Why should we care about this? Really, I'm being serious. Why should we care that a handful of fighters are MAGA Republicans, when there are countless Democratic athletes that, like Luke Thomas told us, are already praised by the media? What's different here that's concerning? Well, let me give you one reason to care. Months after Covington visited the White House, in an interview for Breitbart, Donald Trump said, and I quote, "I have the tough people, but they don't play it tough until they go to a certain point, and then it would be very bad, very bad." Like a lot of Trump's statements, this may sound a bit vague, but what he really meant, that certain point he said we'd get to, would become clear just a few years later. But before we discuss this, I want to take you back to 2016, the year Trump was elected.
Fight fans are heading home as UFC's biggest weekend in history wraps up. When they get home, they learn the UFC has officially been sold. Sports director Chris Matthews.
After spending a decade and a half transforming the UFC from quote-unquote human cockfighting into a professionalized sports league, Dana and his high school friends, the billionaire casino moguls, the Fertitta brothers, finally cashed out. They turned their initial $2 million investment into $4.2 billion, which is a staggering return. The Fertitta brothers would leave the business, while Dana stayed on as the public face of the organization. But the story I'm interested in here isn't just the economic success. It's about the new buyer and his stakes in the whole right-wing UFC turn. The company that bought the UFC is called Endeavor. It's an entertainment management corporation based in Hollywood, and Endeavor's CEO is Ari Emanuel. For those who haven't heard the name, he's an iconic talent agent. He managed Mark Wahlberg, and Martin Scorsese, and Larry David, and The Rock. And he's so iconic, so ruthless, that the hit HBO show Entourage created a character based entirely on him.
I'm calling to tell you that I blame you for every bad thing that's ever happened to Vince, and every bad thing that ever could happen to him for the rest of his life. You're the unfucking lucky charm. You hear me? You should never utter the words, "I found a good script," because you have no idea what a good fucking script looks like. Live with that.
And, to be fair, it wasn't that far from real-life Ari.
You know something? You need to sit down. That's a bad example, okay? That's a bad example.
All right.
Go sit down, and then think of something else and come back up, and I'll scream at you again.
Okay, well, hey.
The show's massive popularity gave Emanuel a lot of clout.
It's for sure opened a lot of doors, and people would pick up my phone call.
Is there anybody today that won't return your phone calls? I assume there's nobody in the world.
I get a lot of people on the phone when I need to.
You know who picked up Emanuel's call? Trump. He was Trump's agent during The Apprentice, his peak reality TV years, which was what got Trump known to the wider American public and set the stage for his presidential run. So needless to say that the two work well together. Very well. After Trump's inauguration in 2017, Emanuel was one of the first to visit the president in the Oval Office. Trump called him a very good friend of mine and even considered him for a White House post. Now, when Emanuel's company Endeavor bought the UFC, it seemed like a good thing. Sure, Dana had worked hard to grow the sport, but the UFC was still far from the popularity of leagues like the NBA and the NFL. So the sale was a necessary step on the path towards greater exposure. It was an opportunity to showcase the entertaining talent the league had. And in many ways, it worked. The UFC would sign a broadcast deal with ESPN and break all previous revenue records, and go mainstream in a way that was just unimaginable in its early years. But these first years under Endeavor were also when the UFC shifted hard to the right. Now again, yes, there were other cultural shifts happening back then. But the UFC's shift happened under Emmanuel's ownership. Ownership that cares a lot about its bottom line. And that happens to have a close relationship to Trump. So the turn towards Trump was either ignored or maybe goaded by its new ownership. The irony is that Ari Emanuel is a card-carrying Democrat. His brother is freaking Rahm Emanuel, the former Obama chief of staff and Democratic mayor of Chicago. Now, listen. I'm not saying that Emanuel needed to play partisan politics, like that he should have turned the organization into a Democratic pulpit instead. What I am saying is that after buying the UFC, Emanuel fostered his relationship with Trump and embraced the controversy that came with it. He is, after all, in the entertainment business, and controversy sells. So it was during the Endeavor period that Trump became the first sitting president to attend a UFC event, when he became a UFC mainstay. Here's journalist Sam Egan explaining why he thinks the UFC went down this path.
So my hot take here, I think that the UFC is betting really hard on the emergence of basically parallel economies. In the same way that like Black Rifle Coffee is like, you need coffee made for conservatives. Like they are, I think, betting on the fact that they can continue to make money hand over fist by catering to a conservative audience, by presenting themselves as the alternative specifically to the NFL and the NBA, who are like more willing to embrace aspects of like the Black Lives Matter movement.
Meanwhile, MMA analyst Luke Thomas has seen the UFC shift its brand identity to match the cultural zeitgeist of the times, which also happens to protect its business.
Dude, like they did woke shit before. You know what I mean? They used to do We Are All Fighters t-shirt with like the LGBTQ colors. And like on some level, they were a reflection of the prevailing norms at the time. It was corporate social responsibility. It was protecting group interests beyond the predominant ones. And now we're in an era where that's not the case, where they are a reflection of the prevailing norms, where it is impossible to shame anybody into doing anything anymore.
This all has been good for business, sure. But there were repercussions to Emanuel letting the UFC go further down the right-wing path. Yes, it emboldened fighters like Covington to express controversial views without fearing professional consequences, because, well, it sold. But worse, it enabled conspiratorial far-right views that were already gaining popularity in the United States around the time Trump announced his candidacy. Some of these views were about Emanuel himself. Take alt-right icon Alex Jones ranting about the entire Emanuel family being at the center of, and I quote, the Jewish mafia.
Oh, but it's okay because the Emanuels are liberals. And Obama would do what he said. Let me tell you, the Emanuels are mafia. And, you know, I was thinking, they're always trying to claim that if I talk about world government and corruption, I'm anti-Semitic. But, I mean, it's not that Jews are bad. It's just they are the head of the Jewish mafia in the United States. They run Uber. They run the healthcare. They're going to scam you. They're going to hurt you. And then they got weirdos that they're allied with, like George Soros, who's a literal Nazi collaborator, rounding up Jews. I mean, it's like, if being against Jews that are weirdo Nazi collaborators and gangsters makes me anti-Semitic, then fine.
Just after he announced his 2016 presidential run, Trump was a guest on Jones's show. Now, these racist conspiracies were present at the beginning of Trump's candidacy. Hell, Alex Jones was at the 2016 Republican National Convention you heard at the top of the episode. So was the prominent white nationalist Richard Spencer. Then movements like QAnon began during his term in office, which is a conspiracy theory that claims Trump is fighting a secretive cabal of pedophiles. And things only got worse as his presidency came to an end. And it was during this time, leading up to the 2020 election, amidst the lockdown and Black Lives Matter protests and right-wing counter-protests and NBA players throwing racial equality quotes on their jerseys and an entire societal and cultural upheaval, that the UFC decided to lean even more into Trump. During COVID, they worked directly with the president's administration to become the first professional sports league to bring back live events.
And I want to congratulate Dana White and the UFC. Get the sports leagues back. Let's play. You do the social distancing and whatever else you have to do.
Then there was the 2020 RNC, where Dana spoke again. and the Trump rallies with fighters like Cejudo and Masvidal and Covington. Truly, by this time, there was no other American sporting league so heavily invested in the election. The UFC had become Trump's sporting arm. Fans and fighters took notice. So on January 6th, at the US Capitol, Trump's Breitbart quote came to life. When some tough people got to a certain point and decided to take back what the president claimed was rightfully his.
We fucking disarm them, and then we storm the fucking Capitol. Huh? Fuck you. We ain't fucking leaving either. We ain't fucking leaving.
No, they work for us. Fuck that.
You've been listening to In the Red Corner. It's hosted by me, Karim Zidane, and is produced by Ellie Blyer. This episode was scored using Blue Dot Sessions. Have any thoughts or questions or things you think we got wrong? Head to sportspolitica.news and join in on the conversation. And if you enjoyed this podcast and want to continue supporting independent journalism, you can become a member of Sportspolitica for just $5 a month. So visit sportspolitica.news. That's Sportspolitica with a K. .news. Thanks for listening. Until next time.